after they realized that no one had ever seen anything like this, they're like, well, we got to figure out what this was. And so people came up with some reasons. And some people thought, well, maybe they were, worried by a dog, right? But then they thought about it 200 square miles, tens of thousands of sheep. You'd have to have like, a couple hundred dogs with walkie talkies going,
Sure.
okay, guys, ready? Hey, everybody. Welcome back to W2F History. Great to have everybody here again with me, David, your host, and my co host, Mike Gatto. Mike Gatto down in, where you at? LA, Long Beach.
I'm in an undisclosed location to the southwest of
Yeah.
Los
You
Angeles.
know what? Honestly, you look like you're in an undisclosed location. You should be holding up a newspaper like, to prove the date that you're still alive. Um,
Well, you look like you're setting the mood in a questionable
yeah,
locale that serves
right.
alcohol and assorted other mind-altering drugs.
I kind of do, huh? I do. We've had so much fun with this series, and we appreciate all the people that are watching it. I think our last 4 episodes have been our last biggest episodes ever.
We have over 100,000 views for each of our last few episodes.
Yeah,
I also got
great.
tremendous feedback from what I'll call the Napoleonic community regarding the episodes we did on the Napoleonic Wars. And what
See,
can
you
I
do
say?
that that everybody's gonna call you on, like Napoleon and Julius Caesar. You're just inviting people to go, well, no, actually, you
And,
know.
and, and by the way, speaking of topic choice, I know you're about to talk about today's topic area.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like the guy from Of Mice and Men, which is on my bookshelf somewhere back there, where I'm
Ooh,
like, hey, can we do
are you the
Roman
little
stuff
guy?
today? Can
Are
we
you the
do
little guy?
Roman stuff today? Tell me about the rabbits, George. And you're like, no, we can't do Roman stuff today.
You'll be
And
my
it
little
just
friend, Mike.
I get so sad when we can't do Roman stuff. So you have to promise me we go back to Roman stuff.
Well, we're close to Rome. It was kind of part of Rome. It was Britannia. Today, we're going to talk about curiosities from the 19th century. Is that about right, Mike?
That's right. The 1800s for people
Yeah.
who
For,
need it simplified.
for people, for people from Long Beach. Um, I shouldn't say that. I don't have anything against Long Beach. That was
You
rude.
should not say that.
Yeah. For people from Arkansas? No, one of my clients lives in Arkansas. I
Yeah,
take that
that's
back
right.
too. Shit.
That's right.
Anyway. Um, so today we're going to talk about curiosities from the 1800s, kind of like the one we had with the billionaire who went missing from his plane. By the way, that's one we should do a complete episode on because we could have really gotten deep on that one, the
Sure.
billionaire who fell from the sky. So today, what we're going to talk about are some curiosities from the 1800s, and mine is first. I'm going to go first, Mike, and I want to talk about sheep. And I know you're all happy now.
So I'll just say, sheep. This is a topic that gets you excited.
Yeah, is that like a pun? Is that a pun?
No, not a pun at all. Just, sheep gets you excited.
You. Hey, get it? All right, so I'm going to go over the Great Sheep Panic of 1888. Now, this one I really like. I like this one. It's very mysterious.
When you told me you were going to do this topic today, I had never heard of it. I wondered if it had something to do with trading sheep futures on a stock exchange. It doesn't.
The
So,
Great Sheep Panic. Sell.
you know, yeah,
So in 1888, let's go out to the rolling hills of Oxfordshire. The hedgerows and a lot of farmers, right? A lot of little small family farms in that area. Stone houses, and they have what they call sheepfolds. And sheepfolds are where you put sheep like at night. Shepherds do it. Everybody does it because that's how sheep behave. You let them graze during the day, and then you put them in these folds. A lot of times, shepherds out in the open, they'll use like thorny bushes to keep the sheep in amongst a bunch of rocks. And anyway, they just protect them. So what we're talking about here are about 200 square miles of the Oxfordshire countryside, where a lot of small farmers, we're talking like probably 100, 52, anywhere from 50 to 100 small family farms are out there with their sheep. And it's nighttime. It's about 8 o'clock at night on November 3rd, 1888. And a farmer was sitting in, I guess, I don't know what he did in 1888. He was probably reading Oscar Wilde, right? In front of a fire. I don't know if a farmer reads Oscar Wilde. They're
I don't,
probably
I don't think so. I'm
Dickens.
not sure that they had literacy among the shepherds.
That's true. He's probably whittling A
Right.
farmer, a country farmer in Oxfordshire was whittling in front of the fire.
Or if he was related to you, he was just enjoying the company of his sheep.
Yeah. So so anyway, he's sitting there and suddenly he hears his sheepdogs going crazy, right? The sheepdogs are just going nuts. Like he can't, he's like, what the hell's going on here? So he puts on his boots and he puts on his, his overcoat, grabs his gun, grabs his rifle, because he's assuming, right, as is always the case with a sheep herder, with a sheep farmer, you probably have a fox, right? Foxes have gotten into the fold, or a stray dog has gotten in there, something, right, that's driving the sheep crazy. And so he's like, all right, I got to find out what's making my dogs go crazy. So he gets out there and he opens the door, and all around him are just these terrified sheep. And it's not like the usual, like, goofy sheep following a goofy sheep to a goofy place, because that's what they do, right?
Mm.
They're a herding animal, or
Right.
they like to be herded, and they just follow each other, right? Like, there are instances where they'll follow each other off a cliff if they're in, behind a real dumb sheep. So anyway, so he grabs his gun, right? He's looking around and he's like, what the hell is doing this? Because the sheep, again, they're terrified. They're terrified. It's not that they're following a sheep that, one of the sheep that got loose. The look in their eyes is they are running from the hounds of hell. And so he goes back there with his rifle at the ready and his dogs. And Mike, there's nothing there.
Hmm.
There's nothing there. Like, he cannot figure out, why did his sheep, not just are they running, they burst through the holding. They burst through the fences. They burst through the gates. They trampled all of the shrubs, or the hedges, right? They trampled over the hedgerows, even though they did great injury to themselves by doing so. If you've been in England, you know those hedgerows are no joke. Um, and they just, like, were going out somewhere, but they were getting the hell out of there. And so the farmer is like going crazy. He's like, what the hell? He can't figure it out. So the next morning he's like, okay, well, I got to go get my sheep. You can't get them at night, right? I mean, what are you going to do? And so what he's learning is that all the farmers in a 200-mile radius had
Wow.
the same issue. At around 8 o'clock that night, all of their sheep just burst out again, didn't get loose and followed one. They had to get out of their folds. Whatever they did, they had to get out. They, even again, Mike, even if it meant breaking a leg, they were getting the hell out of there, and they
Wow.
ran off for miles. So, sheep will usually get loose, but, they're not going to go too far. They'll go a couple hundred yards, right? And then they'll start grazing. These went miles and miles away. They were getting away from something. And all of the farmers, they're like, what was it? There was nothing. There were no foxes. They saw no people. They could not figure out what happened. But in total, it was tens of thousands of sheep that panicked that night over a 200 square mile area. Tens of thousands of sheep burst out in a terrified madness, headed to who knows where, but not there. So we've looked back in history and tried to find anything else like this 1888 sheep panic, and no one can think of anything. No one can find any reason. We can't find, something similar. There's no similar case of, like, um, like an elephant stampede, but there's always a reason, right? Horses will
Sure.
stampede, but, like, one got stung by a wasp, and, then
Yeah,
they'll
not over
stop.
200 square miles, right? I mean,
Not over
that's
200 square miles, tens of thousands, with no physical evidence of anything. So people started to try to come up with reasons, right? After they realized that no one had ever seen anything like this, they're like, well, we got to figure out what this was. And so people came up with some reasons. And some people thought, well, maybe they were, worried by a dog, right? But then they thought about it, 200 square miles, tens of thousands of sheep. You'd have to have, like, a couple hundred dogs with walkie talkies going,
sure.
okay, guys, ready? Go. And so I don't think dogs are that organized, to be honest with you. So it wasn't the dog. Then some people thought, well, maybe there was a slight earthquake tremor, because we know how animals can pick up,
Yeah.
earthquake signals before humans. But no one else had felt anything like that, and they had earthquakes before. I mean, slight tremors in England. Sheep's hadn't done that before,
Plus,
and
you would think there would be reports of other animals being spooked if there was an earthquake. You'd have horses and dogs acting strange and cats and stuff, and doesn't sound like there's any record of that.
Correct. There's no record of that. There's no record of other animals doing the same thing. And Mike, there's been no record of the sheep ever doing it again when they have actually had recorded, tremors in England. And they didn't have a case of tens of thousands of sheep running into the night like, harried banshees. So look, everyone was trying to come up with a reason. Um, the Scottish Agriculture magazine, well, the Livestock Journal, if I can read,
Yeah.
permission to read, Mike.
Permission granted.
Yeah. So the Livestock Journal of 1888 was looking into this, and the Livestock Journal said, as we believe, the panic is spread by what they called hearing. And a flock one or two is frightened on a very dark night. Then at once, flocks three and four are disturbed. And the sound of their excitement attracts the attention of four and five, who are simultaneously panic driven, the distress expanding from one center as the rings upon the surface of a pond expand, right? From, throwing a rock in there, which actually, when you first hear that, you're like, oh, I think you got something. Yeah, but it's never happened again. And so I'm sure that, right, that flocks in close proximity to one another, if you're going to, for the sake of argument, call 200 square miles close proximity, there have been flocks that have been scared before. But we didn't have this type of a mass panic amongst
So I would
sheep.
question with that one, right? Is anybody who's seen this part of the world, they know that there's rolling hills. There's differences in topography. There's also, I would be curious to hear, if was it a night where sound carried or was it a night that sound doesn't carry? Those of us who live out in the open, I understand there's certain nights where the atmospheric conditions, sound carries, other nights it doesn't. I'd be very, very shocked to hear that sheeps could hear, their compatriots crying from a couple miles away.
Correct. Especially in November, right?
Yeah,
In the hills of Oxfordshire. So there's probably wind. We also note, as I'm going to talk about next, there was a cloud cover, so sound wouldn't transfer as well as it would on a very clear, right, on a crystal clear night.
sure.
So I don't think, as you said, I don't think that the situation is ripe for like a pin dropping over in this valley and the sheep hear it 110 miles away. I
Right.
think you're right. Um, so Scottish Agriculture magazine looked into this again. I mean, because everyone has been talking about it in that area, right? What the hell happened to the sheep that night? And if you don't mind, if I can read again from Scottish Agriculture in
Go ahead, scholar.
1921. And what I find funny is this is kind of the reason that everyone has come up with. Everyone has kind of solidified upon this reasoning for the sheep panic of 1888. And so what Scottish Agriculture said was, another witness wrote that a little before 8 o'clock, there was an extraordinary black cloud traveling from northwest to southeast. So an extraordinary super black cloud. And people are going to talk about that in many other articles, that it was super, super dark that night. In addition to the darkness, a lot of it was caused by that black cloud being close to the earth. And the cloud appeared to be rolling along the ground. The darkness lasted for 30 or 40 minutes, and during that time, it was like being shut up in a dark room. Later in the night, long after the panics, there were several flashes of lightning. And then the scientific journal Nature also noted that the 3 November 1888 panic had been an intensely dark night with occasional flashes of lightning, and that's what caused the panic, as sheep are notoriously timid and nervous animals. Again, you know, that's what we're going with.
Yeah. I mean, let me interject again, right? I mean, this is a 200-mile area. This is largely before electric lights. There probably were no electric lights, but I guarantee that in 200 square miles, there was one sheep's enclosure that was next to a farmhouse where, the shepherd and his buddies were up partying and they had torches lit and they had,
Sure.
so I mean, like the idea that 200 square miles was all uniformly dark and that scared the sheep, again, kind of strange to me. Not doubting the scientists, but kind of strange to me.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that the reasoning I think that everyone has finally agreed upon is pretty weak tea, you know? So essentially their reasoning is, um, it was dark. No, no, bro. I mean, really dark. Like that's it. That's as good as it gets. As if that's the only really dark night we've had in England.
Exactly.
in the last 140 years. Um, so, intense darkness caused the Great Sheep Panic of 1888. I really would love to know what caused it, Mike. I don't think we ever will. I
Well,
don't
that's
think
my
it,
question. That's my question to you. What if you had to speculate, someone stuck a gun to your head, give me your best intuition.
I mean, part of me wants to say that maybe there was an organized group that just wanted to pull like of a massive widespread prank.
Huh.
Um, the only other thing I can think of was maybe something paranormal. If you're gonna go with that, maybe I shouldn't.
So here,
Maybe
I got something that
maybe I'm killing my credibility.
no, look, I have something that I think could possibly explain it. And it has explained a lot of things in the past, which is I would wonder if the conditions were just right that year in that area, that there was a fungus that grew on what the sheeps were grazing on. There are similar examples with humans
Mhm.
where there were
Contagion
ergotamine,
sickness.
things where the wheat that year got just damp enough and the conditions were just right and the spores were flying through the air. So people were basically, ergotamine, as people know, is very similar to magic mushrooms or LSD, and people would end up having trips. I would just wonder if perhaps in that area there was in those 200 square miles, there was something wrong with the grass, or there was a fungus that grew, something that was hallucinogenic that hit as the sheep got home, and then there was a contagion, right? Because at that point, if enough herds were just going crazy, that there was some sort of contagious effect. That would be
You,
my best bet.
you know what? I kind of like where you're going there. I didn't think about that, but now that I'm thinking about it, since you've said it, we do have the ergo caused laughing sicknesses and
Yeah,
dancing sicknesses, which it brought out a mania, right?
sure.
In large groups of people. So maybe that kind of created the right atmosphere for even a smaller type of excitement, to cause something like that. And it did happen. You could say, yeah, but it was in such a wide area. But you
Yeah,
could also say, yeah, but that area was contained, right?
sure.
So maybe what was growing in that area.
Yeah.
That's not bad. I think that's better than, bro, it was dark,
It was dark in England and there was some rain. Oh, yeah.
intensely
That's
dark.
kind of weird. Yeah.
So anyway, that's my sheep panic of 1888, Mike. I know it's a little off
Um,
the mark, but it interested me, and I don't think a lot of people have heard about it. So WTF?
I had never heard of it. Hope it made the audience say WTF. And I've got one that hopefully makes everybody out there say WTF too. Again, our theme is strange oddities, curiosities from the 1800s. I'm going to lead this up with by saying that some of you have watched our previous episodes that kind of hit on some of these themes. David did a wonderful vignette in one of our early episodes about the fact that United States President John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States, born in the 1790s, had living grandsons until recently, which is just incredibly hard to believe, right? And we did another episode where I talked about the bonus march, the conditions in the Great Depression being so bad, and how, an accelerated military pension was really the only hope that a lot of people had during an era where there were no social safety nets. So, my topic today is Civil War pensions. As many of you know, the Civil War ended in 1865, 13 years before, or 23 years before the Great Sheep uh, epidemic, right? But the Civil War ended in 1865. And David, you and I have talked about this, so don't ruin this. But I'll ask the audience: when do you think the last Civil War pension was paid? And the answer is 2020 during
I
the
was going to say,
COVID pandemic.
my answer was going to be Thursday.
No, it's not Thursday. It was
Close.
2020 during the COVID pandemic. So the first example we're going to go into is Maudie Hopkins, who died in 2008. And she was at her death, she was the oldest surviving widow of a Confederate soldier. And people might be doing some math and saying, gee, she was probably born in she was born in 1914. How is it possible that she was a Civil War widow? Well, that's the phenomenon that I want to talk with you about today. People who don't understand the Great Depression don't understand how desperate things were, how poor people were in the state, in the United States, and also they don't understand that we had no social safety nets. There was no Social Security, there was no Medicare, there were no such thing as retirement plans or 401ks. There was nothing like that. So what you had during the Great Depression is this phenomena. You had a lot of people in very, very poor towns, most of them clustered in the South, who they had no prospects. The young men had no prospects, the young women had no prospects, there was nothing. But in most of these towns, there's at least one man who had fought in the Civil War. And those soldiers were entitled to pensions until they died. And also, and this is what's really important, their spouses and their disabled biological kids were entitled to pensions until they died. So during the Great Depression, you had so many people throughout the South where there would be in many cases, there would be a couple that was betrothed. They would be 18 and 19 years old. And the guy would say, "Hey, listen, I love you, but don't marry me. Go marry that Civil War veteran because that's our only hope of surviving."
Mm.
You had parents who told their daughters that. You had old men who knew that, they didn't care about these young women in any way, in any bad way, but they wanted to pass on their tiny little bit of money that they could get to keep these little towns alive. So that's what happened with Maudie Hopkins. She was a very young lady, and she married a guy by the name of William Cantrell. William Cantrell had a fascinating story in the Confederate States. He was actually captured and was part of a prisoner exchange. This Maudie Hopkins ended up marrying him in the throes of the Depression. She died in 2008. She was the last surviving Confederate widow. This is what's interesting. You can often tell more about a society by what they are banning than by what they are allowing. Like, there's many examples over history where you go back and you can look at a law and you're like, wow, they have to pass a law banning that. And that can tell you more about society than what they were allowing. Well, so it was really interesting. In Arkansas in 1937, in the throes of the Depression, they had to pass a law prohibiting people from marrying Civil War veterans because of this phenomena. They passed a law in 1937 in Arkansas that said if your marriage date is after 1870, you can no longer collect the pensions from these Civil War veterans. And that was in many cases, in response to people like poor Maudie Hopkins, who just wanted to survive in her small town. The next person I want to talk about also has a fascinating story, and she is the longest serving or the longest collector of a Civil War pension. And her name is Gertrude Janeway. And fascinating, she married her guy just before the Great Depression started. So maybe this was in 1927. She was 18 years old and she married an officer from the 14th Illinois Cavalry on the Union side of things who was 81 years old. And the amazing thing is that it wasn't a sham marriage. There was tons of witnesses. They had a celebration. They had a party. It was really, fascinating. She received a $70 pension check for veterans benefits every 2 months until her death in 2003. It was noted at her death that the payments of those Civil War pension things had spanned 3 centuries, the 1800s, 1900s, and of course, the 2000s. But now we're getting into some of the more fascinating cases. And we're going to talk about two last people who deserve a mention. And of course, the next one is Irene Triplett. And she was, it is believed, the last collector of a Civil War pension. And she collected her Civil War pension until the end of May 2020. And Irene Triplett she was sort of an example like the vignette that you told about John Tyler. She was just the product of a very, very old father, right? She was one of five children of a soldier who had fought for both the Confederacy and the Union. Her father was 78 when he married her mother, and it was actually her mother's second marriage too, which is fascinating.
It's just like
But
the
she wa
Tyler story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And she was born in 1930 to Moses Triplett, who was 83 at the time. God bless Moses. But sadly, she was disabled. Irene Triplett was disabled, and so she qualified under the pensions thing. As I said at the beginning, a soldier's disabled biological child could receive their pension, and so she became the last person that we know of to collect a Civil War pension in 2020, which is just amazing when you think
Crazy.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the crazy thing is these pensions started out very modest. They really did not have what we now call COLAs or cost of living adjustments.
Mhm.
Her pension was $73.13 a month. Folks, this was a fortune in the 1800s. This was a fortune in the Great Depression. I mean, this was like, holy crap, lived very comfortably in the Great Depression. But of course, by the year 2020, $73 a month was not much. The total she collected was 73,000. They say it was about 350,000 if you adjust it for inflation. But very, very fascinating story, Irene Triplet. And the last one that is worth talking about is also somebody who died in 2020. And she is the last widow of a Civil War soldier. And it's again just shocking that the last widow, not just children, the last widow of a Civil War soldier also died in 2020. It was a watershed year. And this is Helen Viola Jackson. In the midst of the Great Depression, depths of the Depression, 1936, very, very poor family. She married a Civil War veteran. It's really amazing. She had actually volunteered to help this old guy. Again, folks, there was nothing sexual. There's nothing untoward. She had volunteered to help this old guy do his chores. She didn't even know he had a pension. She was just a young girl. She just volunteered to help him. He said, "Hey, I got nothing to pay you. I have nothing. It's the depression. I have no income. The only thing that I have is this pension." And he said, "Look, you get it if you marry me. Obviously there's going to be nothing between us, but why don't we get married? And if you do, you'll get this pension for the rest of your life." She did marry him with the full blessing of her father and the blessing of everybody else around there. But here's the fascinating thing about Helen Viola Jackson. She declined the pension. She said she did not want to collect it. She gave it to his biological children instead. And this is even during the Depression. What a fantastic, kind woman this was. She literally, she was helping this guy do his chores because he was too disabled to do them himself. And then, he kind of insisted, "Hey, marry me and you can have my pension." And then she declined it after he died. The most fascinating thing about her is that she didn't even tell people that she had been legally married to him, but the marriage records reflect that she was.
Hmm.
There were plenty of witnesses, and she is the last confirmed Civil War widow. Not a pensioner, but widow. Um, some of the organizations that follow this stuff, though, they note though that they believe there are two women still alive who are Civil War widows. They believe there were similar circumstances to this. They do not know if they're collecting pensions or not, or how late they collected pensions, or if they're declining them now. But they have noted that these women are very private and they do not want their stories told. I'm sure the stories are probably pretty similar to the ones we went over: desperation, poor, poverty during the Great Depression, but just an amazing curiosity of the 1800s. The fact that a war that ended in 1865 could still see people receiving pension funds from it in the year 2020. Truly something that spans 3 centuries and unites us to our historical
Yeah,
past.
yeah, great. That is a great story. I didn't like, you and I've talked about this before, so it's kind of I knew it was recent. I don't know if I knew it was as recent as 2020. But it's very similar to the story that we did on John Tyler. If you haven't watched that one,
Yes.
I'd recommend watching that one. That's one of the first ones we did because that's one of my favorite. Um, that's one of my favorite historical stories. Is the fact that John Tyler has a grandson.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Not no. Yes, you heard us right. Grandson, only one grand.
Yeah.
Crazy, crazy. And this is
But
just as
one thing that I like, obviously these are fans of history, and this is how, we'll close this episode, right? We are our history, right? There's people alive who are ties to our past. People have done these charts where, there was so and so who met George Washington and died at 100, and then so and so met him and died at 100. I will say that one of my good friends, his name, somebody that folks have seen me tweet about and talk about a lot, is Maury Markoff. He just passed away a couple weeks ago at the age of 110. He almost made it to 111. His first memory, which he told my kids about firsthand, were the parades that ended World War One. And if you think about it, imagine my children living to 120 and telling their kids again that they talked with someone firsthand about the details of the parades that ended World War One, and
yeah.
talking about this sometime in the 2100s. It's amazing, folks. We are all ties to our history.
Yeah, that's a great story. Mike, I think these were two good ones. They weren't our typical, kings and battles. But we need a break from all that stuff every once in a while. And this was really good. I really liked your story, and I bet a lot of people didn't know about that and are saying WTF on that one. And I hope all of you guys enjoyed it. Mike and I alluded to it in the beginning, or not alluded to it, we said it in the beginning. Thank you all who are sharing this with people. I think all of our last episodes have had over 100K viewers. We're growing and we really love it. We know that there are people that love this type of history. It's the stuff that you're not taught in schools, unfortunately. But Mike and I, we do the research for you. And so we'll educate you on this stuff. Mike, anything to say before we go?
Thank you, everybody, for making the show such a success.
All right, man. Thank you. See you next time, Mike.
See you next time.
Hey, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. It really means a lot, and we would love to have you coming back every week. Thank you.